Today is Mr. Jim Shaw, running for House District 32. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir, very much. Appreciate it.
You bet. Well, I say welcome back because you were on here not too long ago.
That's right.
And so it's I love to do a follow-up like this because as a campaign progresses, things change. You know, your confidence, your understanding of issues, that you're talking to more and more voters. And so how have things changed from our first interview and now this one?
I mean, I would say, things have obviously picked up considerably since we talked last time, but in a very good way. You know, we've been moving towards certain goals and benchmarks along the way, and we've been hitting every single one of them. So I'm super happy with where we're at today compared to where we were when we first started.
Yeah. So. Now, what kind of benchmarks are you talking about?
So just, overall, I've knocked on, thousands of doors, gotten in front of a lot of people, had different town halls and other events we've been going to, and just overall feedback that we're getting at the doors and otherwise. I mean, it's just everything's moving in the direction that we want it to.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit earlier about how you involve your family in the mix. So you got 2 girls, right?
2 girls, 9, and actually almost a week away from 7. So 9 and 7.
9 and 7.
Yeah.
They're out knocking doors with you, huh?
They are. I mean, they challenged us too. I mean, let's hit 100 doors in a day, or let's hit 40 doors in a night. I did 40 doors for my 40th birthday a couple weeks ago. My wife, and I have been married 15 years, and she's just been shoulder to shoulder with me the whole way, and it's just been fantastic. So.
I love it. Yeah, that was one of my joys, is involving my family in the whole process.
Yeah.
And they learned a lot. They got tired of it towards the end.
I'm sure.
But I loved having them right there by me, knocking doors with me. So It's a beautiful thing. Remind people, though, I don't want to assume everybody remembers you from the first interview. Who are you? What have you been doing up to this point?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm, originally from Oklahoma City, moved out to Lincoln County, out to Chandler about 3 years ago with my family. Professionally, I've been in the oil and gas industry for 20 years. The first half was at Chesapeake Energy here in Oklahoma City. The last half, software and services, I co-owned and was president and COO of a software business for about 10 years, and we sold that a couple of years ago, but I'm still in the space. So
okay. And so do you anticipate that being every legislator, when they come in, they have their lane, their strength, based on their background, whether it be education or oil and gas. So do you think that would be your lane going into the office if you were to be elected?
I think that would be a big part of it. I mean, I'm super proud. I just got endorsed by the Oil and Gas Workers Association yesterday, and super proud of that. And so obviously energy policy is going to be top for me. Overall tax and government spending, having co-owned a business. I mean, there's certain disciplines that you have to have when running a business, and I think that will translate over really well when I get into the House.
Yes, here with candidate Jim Shaw, running for House Seat 32. I talked about earlier in the show the smears happening, of course, in the last few days of leading into the primaries last week. And so we expect things to heat up, a lot of desperate moves, desperate messaging and things like that to try to get ahead. You're running against an incumbent, Wallace. And we're, again, talking about this before we went on live, is he has a record. So when you're going against an incumbent, they have a voting record. What does his look like, and is that part of your messaging and things you're highlighting?
It certainly is. I mean, he's been there for 10 years. He's been the chair of appropriations and budget for a number of years. And so there's certainly, when we talk about contrasting and why should people look at me for this job as opposed to him, 100% of our messaging is around fact and what has his voting record indicated and where does he stand on certain issues. So that's a huge thing that we're leaning into. At the top of the list, really, are taxes and overall government spending. I mean, he's voted, either authored or voted for, I think, about 24 different tax hikes since he's been in office, including the most significant tax hike in Oklahoma state history, a large gross production tax on the oil and gas industry years ago. So that's definitely, some of the top reasons why I'm running.
That's what I was about to ask you. Is he the reason you're running?
I mean, that's a big component to it, right? My whole platform, the 3 core tenets to my platform are land is number 1, number 2 is livelihoods, and number 3 is legacies. And especially in my district and in rural America, I mean, those 3 are very interconnected and very important. And so when we look at the land category, some issues that we're facing, of which, I believe Wallace and his voting record indicates that as part of the problem is the industrial wind and solar complexes that are being proposed in my district and in the surrounding areas. there's so many negatives to those. I mean, they're not good for our communities. They're not good for our state. He is actually taking, campaign in contributions and endorsements from, the renewables industry. That, along with the human manure, biosolid, and sludge issue in my district and also in the surrounding district, he's admitted to using that a couple of times himself personally. There's also legislation coming forward to provide immunity to the cities, the distributors, and the farmers that are participating in that. Those were two kind of last straws for me, and then just the overall tax, in government spending that I talked about, which ultimately impacts our way of life and our livelihood. Which at the end of the day, we want to leave this place, better for our future generations, which is the legacies that I'm also running on.
With candidate Jim Shaw running for House District 32, you just touched on several things that are like hot buttons for me, because I've interviewed so many people in this realm of the renewables and the human manure. Yeah. Man, I mean, I've covered it a lot, but let's talk about it a little bit more for those that may not fully understand. What is human manure?
So you're literally taking extra human waste from the sewers in the city, you're trucking it out to the rural areas and spreading it on farmland like fertilizer. So yes, we all know that fertilizer costs have increased, and that is a burden. But this is absolutely not the answer.
Well, and we'll stop right there, because at first blush, you say, well, I mean, poop is poop, right? Whether it's human or animal. And fertilizer is fertilizer. So it all stinks, but hey, if it helps the land and everything, this in particular does not help the land. It's actually what is in it that is so dangerous. Coming from all of the medical facilities, the manufacturing facilities, all flooding into one facility, and then all of the chemicals, the pharmaceuticals, all of these things are in this manure, human manure, that is now being, just dumped on the land. Yeah. And now that is going to be in the soil, it's going to be in the food, it's going to be in the beef. Yeah. I mean, I've said a lot. What could you add to that?
I mean, you nailed it. And I mean, at the end of the day, too, like, everybody understands and can recognize like a typical farm, manure smell, whether it's cattle or some other type of livestock. It is very distinct when you smell this human manure. I mean, it has a completely different smell. It is disgusting. It'll hit you like a ton of bricks, especially if you're following one of those trucks or if you're driving through an area. I've had mothers tell me they have to keep their kids indoors for days at a time, and they live miles away from some of these sites. So the ground contamination, the water, the nearby streams. You talk about wildlife like deer that could be, traversing through and eating off of those properties and then moving on. The impact just snowballs. And
then you have the PFAs, the
PFAS, yes.
PFAS, yeah. These chemicals that do not break down.
That's right.
And we see an example up in Maine where this farmland has been completely ruined. And they say probably for the next 100 years, it'll be completely unusable. Yep. And that's what we're looking at as a future here in Oklahoma. If we continue this practice, I think it needs to be shut down immediately, personally. So I'm all in favor of that effort. Yep. And I would not support, those that would be in favor of this straight up. But also talking about the renewables, the wind energy, the solar, not necessarily bad, capturing wind to produce energy. Sounds great, capturing solar. But what are the negatives that come with these?
I can't stand behind an industry that is 100% propped up by our taxpayer dollars, right? If you take the subsidies away from this industry, it doesn't exist. So that alone should provide enough outrage for people to say, well, I shouldn't completely, be funding this industry, and that return on investment just simply doesn't happen. There's also a whole host of environmental and economic issues. I mean, these things, definitely extend beyond the four corners of the property that they're installed on. I hear property rights being an argument of you can't tell me what to do on my property. I 1,000% agree. I am all for property rights, but at the end of the day, we already have a significant setback in place from a state statute standpoint for airports, schools, and hospitals. It's a 1.5 nautical mile setback. Why don't we have that on every occupied structure, right? We're already recognizing that there's a clear health and safety risk, along with the environmental and economic issues that I mentioned. So, they don't deserve to be here.
Yeah. I mean, the more you dig into it, the more it's just shocking.
Yeah.
The environmental impact alone, I mean, to be touted as green and environmental friendly when it is actually the exact opposite.
Yeah, and you talked about some of the new hunting laws coming down, and I mean the wildlife in the areas that these are installed in dramatically suffer.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're an avid hunter, you better take a look at where things are at today, and if these do somehow get installed, or go ask somebody in areas where they've been installed, and they will tell you that the wildlife suffers dramatically.
Right. I mean, when you start breaking it down, the fuel used not only to produce these large windmills, but then to keep them going. I mean, they have grease and oil all in them. and then, like you mentioned, they're not efficient. They're not actually paying for themselves. They're not producing enough energy to sustain themselves. So,
That's right.
that alone should be a reason to rethink this whole thing. Here with candidate Jim Shaw running for House District 32. We're going to go to a break here, and coming back, we'll talk some more about his campaign, those hot-button issues for him, and what he's seeing here in the last days of the campaign leading into the primary. So you guys stay tuned. Have more from Jim coming up after the break right here on the Jake Merrick Show, Freedom 96.9. And here with candidate Jim Shaw running for House District 32. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I love on your bio here online, it talks about your Chandler property, the ACGS Ranch, standing for All Creatures Great and Small.
That's right.
After Shaw's novel. I love that. I love the novel and
Yeah.
the story. And so tell me a little bit about that, your property. And
That was definitely an inspiration. I mean, that novel from James Herriot, right? That wrote the book. So we have everything on our place from cattle all the way down to, my girls have some really tiny sugar gliders, which are they're like little,
they're
almost
awesome.
like flying
Yeah.
squirrels kind of thing. So and everything in between. So that was kind of some inspiration there behind the naming of the ranch.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Well, obviously, when you are engaged with agricultural and wildlife, all of a sudden it means a lot more to you.
Yeah.
You understand where your food comes from. It's kind of critical. And so as we look at lots of issues around the states, talking about property rights, you have on your platform here, defend your property rights. What do you mean by that?
I mean, for some of the reasons that we talked about before the break, I think our property rights are being attacked by this left Green New Deal, this renewable energy movement. I think you've got already some overreach with government trying to tell you what you can and can't do with your property, which, by and large, everybody in my district is dislikes. And I am in favor of a much smaller government at the end of the day. And we may talk about that, but, I think our property rights are crucial, especially where we're at in rural Oklahoma. So.
Oh, let's definitely talk about that. Smaller government, I like that. And as we talk about taxes and tax reform, that's the question on the table is, can we do this? Some would say they're not in favor of this tax reform because we would have to reduce the size of government. And I think others would say, yeah, let's do this so that we can reduce the size of government.
Right.
So talk to me about your view on government size in relation to taxation here in Oklahoma.
Well, I think, a lot of folks that maybe have been in government for too long believe that government is the solution or the answer to everything. And in order for that to be the answer to everything, you have to have money, and then you take more money from taxpayers, right? So when we talk about payer dollars and overall government spending, I think it's the symptom of a much bigger problem. We're not a poor state. Everybody or the government wants you to believe, hey, we don't have enough money here or there. We need more money. We're not a poor. They've got plenty of our money. I mean, we're taxed every which way, up, down, and sideways, but we're a very poorly run state. I think the way that our money is being used and appropriated needs some serious, looking into. And in order to diagnose that problem and to figure out which taxes and fees we should go and attack and try to reduce or eliminate, I believe we need performance audits across the board. So every agency that takes taxpayer money gets financially audited every so often, and that's just to make sure that the numbers line up and everything kind of balances out from an accounting perspective at the end of the day. But performance audits are not being done to ensure that not only is the money being used for its intended purpose, but is it being used efficiently? Are you paying the proper market value for that equipment or that good or that service that you're using our money for? Or are you paying considerably above market value for whatever reason, and thereby wasting a lot of the taxpayer money? Without those performance audits, we really can't understand if we're getting the proper return on investment with our taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely. Here with Jim Shaw, candidate for House District 32. You say also on your website that you believe our faith and conservative values should be reflected in our legislature. So how do you understand this relationship between your faith and your understanding of God, and how that does play into legislation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm nothing without my faith. I'm a huge believer in Jesus Christ, and so I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, the state capitol is probably the place that needs Christian values the most in our society. And it really kind of speaks to, I believe, if you're at the Capitol, I believe your voting behavior and your overall record should be extremely predictable. So for me, from my perspective, what that means is that any bill that comes across my desk when I get into the House is going to pass through 3 different filters. Number 1, the United States Constitution. Number 2, the Oklahoma State Constitution. And then lastly, number 3, the Holy Bible. So if there's a bill that fails one or more of those categories, it's an absolute automatic no. But if it passes all 3 of those, including the Christian values with, the Holy Bible qualifier, then I'll absolutely judge it on its merit.
You have Jim Shaw, candidate for House District 32. Now, public education, I think that along with taxation this session was front and center, especially with what we've seen with Ryan Walters. Some love him, some hate him. What do you believe? Where do you stand on Ryan Walters? Or do you like what you see him doing? Would you change anything?
So I don't know him personally, but if we look at him from his policies, right? If we judge him on the policies that not only did he campaign on, but that he's pushing forward with, and I believe in the policies, the conservative policies that he's been enacting, attacking the LGBTQ agenda, the DEI, critical race theory, social emotional learning, whatever you want to call it. I believe that is fundamentally what the conservative values are that we want represented. So I absolutely stand by those policies.
Wonderful. So you were running against an incumbent. I mentioned him already, Wallace, and we had a voting record there, and so people have access to that, and so by this time I think that they should know whether they are supporting him or not. But then you have you and Schilling on the other side. And from what I've heard and read and everything, it looks like you two are pretty similar. What are the differences, those things that might differentiate you from the other one challenging Wallace?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, he was the mayor of Perkins. Schilling was for a little while back in 2020, so around the COVID era. But ultimately, I believe that my business experience, having co-owned a small business here in Oklahoma City, and the discipline that I had with that, and the success that we had with that business, I think draws a pretty good contrast to Schilling and his overall background.
Okay. Here with Jim Shaw, candidate for House District 32. You say that you're 100% pro-life from conception until natural death. And so, with the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade, we have the abortion clinics across the state shut down. Now the attention has been shifted to abortifacients, even in vitro fertilization. So where would your efforts or your focus be concerning abortion and the preservation of life?
So I absolutely, when I get into the House, there is going to be a piece of legislation that I push forward because to your point, yes, Dobbs came down and we were all excited for that, and that was a huge victory. But people are still circumventing the system and still able to achieve an abortion here in the state of Oklahoma. So the unborn are not getting the protections that they still deserve. And a large amount of that is the chemical abortion pills that you're able to, get through the mail and ship to your home. If you look at the state of Louisiana, for example, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, they passed a bill that classified those chemical abortion pills as a dangerous controlled substance, which means they can't be transmitted in the mail. And I'm absolutely going to push for similar legislation when I get into the House.
All right. It's Jim Shaw, candidate for House District 32. We're in this, last push till the primary. Are you seeing any dark money influence in your campaign?
I mean, there was already a mailer that went out on Friday, which, called me a hypocrite and had, twisted some truths and had some just flat out lies about it. So, yeah, there's that's already in action and, kind of catching wind that there's some additional money that's starting to funnel in that'll be, pushing against me. But, we all kind of know that's unfortunately and ridiculously how these things go.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And like I said, kind of on my soapbox at the beginning of the show, it's something I really despise about the political process and campaigning. I would say run on your own credentials, run on your own strengths, and cast a vision, lead, instead of attacking your competitors. And I think that those things that you put forth as a vision should separate you from the pack. And so I appreciate you this morning. I think you've laid out, what it is that you want to see happen if you were to be elected. Is there anything remaining you'd like to say?
I mean, we all, my entire district desperately and is screaming for a change. I mean, we need a change. We want true constitutional, conservative, servant-oriented leadership at the House. And in order to do that, we've got to show up June 18th and vote and be informed, but absolutely vote.
All right, you said it, June 18th. Jim, I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Jake.
All right, go check him out at shaw4ok.com. That's FOR, shaw4ok.com.